Out of all the personalities you sat down with, who is like the one where you would say this guy, if he wanted to, he could be a president? Out of all you've met with a lot of leaders with strong personalities. They have to be strong negotiators, processors. Who's that one where you think, if this guy ran, I think he would win?
Well, not now, but in his day, I think he would have been a great president. He was in my firm for a number of years, Jim Baker. He had been Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Chief of Staff under Ronald Reagan, 12 years, unblemished record practically in federal service. He's now 93 or 94, not obviously going to be running for president, but he was an incredible person, was in our firm for quite some time, and I really admired him.
And did you read his book? Did you read?
There's a book written about him.
1,000-page book, 1,100-page book.
Well, the book he wrote right after he left, I did read it, but he wrote a second book, which I found better, which is more about politics and so forth. The second book I enjoyed more. The book that's written about him, The Man Who Ran Washington.
That's the one. I couldn't put it down.
The Peter Baker book?
Yeah.
Peter Baker wrote it with his wife. That book is a really good book, and I think it's a really good read on how Washington works and how one man who didn't have a real history in Washington, wasn't really a politician. He came to Washington because his best friend George Bush was helped him get a job there, and all of a sudden, he became very, very prominent in Washington. Did a great job as Chief of Staff from Ronald Reagan, considered the gold standard to be Chief of Staff.
You go on record saying that the greatest American and the greatest president is Abraham Lincoln.
There's no doubt about it.
What is some of those personality traits you think that could be adaptable today in 2022?
Abraham Lincoln held the country together. At that time, most people would have said, the South, you want to go away? Go away. Because, it wasn't easy to say, we're going to fight a civil war of this, in part because the truth is the Civil War was not fought by the North to free the slaves. That wasn't the initial mission. It was to hold the Union together. Later, he did the Emancipation Proclamation, which was done as a war measure to help him win the war, because he was going to have 200,000 black soldiers fighting for the Union, which he did, and ultimately helped win the war. Abraham Lincoln had a number of great qualities, but one of them was one we haven't talked about, which is humility. Abraham Lincoln didn't go to Ford's Theater the night before he was assassinated and say, you know what, I won the war. I won the Civil War. Aren't I great? How great am I? He didn't brag about himself. He had a lot of humility, and I think humility is a great virtue. And he had a lot of self-deprecating humor that he would bring to the case. He would say, people say I'm two-faced. Well, if I had two faces, why would I wear this one? Because he was the person who held the country together. There's no doubt that the country would not have stayed together without Lincoln. Most politicians would not have done what he did. So I think he was the greatest American.
When he became a president, was it Buchanan? Right,
James Buchanan was the previous president.
Right. So he would say, "Listen, slavery is something I'm going to work with and go with." He was kind of like Ford, just to get.
Lincoln said the same thing.
Yeah.
See, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. That came about at the end of Lincoln's term. It was passed by Congress a couple days before he was assassinated. But in when James Buchanan, who was not a great president, maybe one of our weakest ever, he supported something called the Corwin Amendment, which was the 13th Amendment as it was intended to be. That said, slavery is the law of the land, and it can't be changed in the existing states that have it. Lincoln, in his inaugural address, the first one, he endorsed that, because he thought he had to make it clear to people in the South, look, I'm not trying to get rid of slaves. I just don't want slavery to be expanded to the other states, the western states. But in your states, it's in the Constitution. We're going to keep that. And Lincoln said that in his inaugural address. Now, obviously, he evolved over a period of time. But Lincoln was not an abolitionist by far. He was not. There were many people who wanted to abolish slavery. He was not one of them initially.
What's your favorite Lincoln book?
I think I think the John Meacham one is really good. But Doris Kearns Goodwin, The Team of Rivals, which was made into the Lincoln movie, is a spectacular book. But there are 10,000 books on Lincoln. And I asked Doris Kearns Goodwin, why did you think the world needed another one? But she came up with a novel concept that Lincoln was so secure that he took people who were his rivals for the presidency, and he put them in the cabinet. And they ultimately became people who had initially thought he was nothing, but now they became to admire him greatly.
Okay, do you think there'll be a time where we'll have a Republican president and a Democratic VP, or a Democratic president and a Republican VP? You think, because I think it happened one time. What was the year when a candidate had a opposing party VP that they're running with? There was somebody that happened. And by the way, this wasn't too long ago. This was like 50, 60 years ago, 70 years ago. Do you think we'll have that ever happen?
It's hard to see, because right in the old days, the way the Constitution was originally set up, whoever had the most votes for president got to be president. Whoever the second most became vice president. We've changed the Constitution, so that probably is harder to do now. But look, maybe to get a unified ticket, you could do that. But on the other hand, the vice president doesn't have that much power relative to the president, so I'm not sure the vice president's party would think it's a good consolation. But nothing's impossible. Who could say what's impossible?
So with all the craziness taking place, I believe future looks bright. If you believe future looks bright, get your latest Future Looks Bright hat of Valuetainment. It says Future Looks Bright here, Future Looks Bright here. We got them in white, we got them in black, we got them in red. Our black on black sold out. These are about to sell out. If you haven't ordered one yet, we had a person in Michigan, bought one, then he bought 3. Then when those 3 people weren't in the office, they had to order 58 of them because people wanted the Future Looks Bright hat, especially during times like this, because ain't nobody saying Future Looks Bright. To order your Future Looks Bright hat, click over here. And to watch the entire podcast, click here. Take care, everybody.